This, dear friends, is the story of Magnus Carlsen on 12th of February and his girlfriend and his chess. There you see Magnus coming to the game in a very good mood. Although he lost his first game against Alireza Firouzja at the Freestyle Chess here in Weissenhaus, he was in a must-win scenario. Yet Magnus was in great spirits, and I think this is one of the key aspects of chess. If you come to the game in good spirits, it is sure to help you. And one of the reasons why Magnus was in great spirits was because of his girlfriend, Ella. As Magnus entered the room, it was close to 1 p.m. The game was about to begin.
Sarah Miss Angola International. Welcome back. Ollie, whenever you're ready. It is number, still no joker, number 607.
The position that came out was 607. And you can see that Magnus did not discuss with any of the other players. He sat down on his chair and started to think about the position. The two bishops were on the side, there was a knight, rook, king, and Magnus needed all his energy to find what was the best first move and the opening strategy. After all, he had to play for a win against Alireza Firouzja. This is not at all an easy task on any given day. But you could see Magnus's focus, and then Alireza arrived. He shook hands, and Alireza also has this habit of not discussing with other players. He likes his own space, he likes to think for himself. And there you had it. The game began, and Magnus, with the white pieces, opened with 1 e4. He felt this was the right way to continue, and then Alireza Firouzja replied back with a symmetrical variation. You can see that both the players were sort of copying the moves of each other. In fact, Alireza was copying Magnus's moves until some move 5 or 6, but here the symmetry was broken, and you will see that Magnus started to get an advantage. It was very important for black to play the move a5 here, hitting the queen, because if the queen took the pawn, then the rook would come to b8 and eventually take the pawn on b2, and black is doing completely fine here. But as it turns out, Firouzja played b6, and this was the start of his downfall. He moved his queen and spoiled his structure, and Magnus played this beautiful positional move. When Magnus pushed his pawn to d5, it was already a great position for him. These are the kinds of position that Magnus loves to grind, and in fact, after making this move, he was looking so confident he started watching games of other players. He came back to the board, sat down, but it was clear to him that this was his game. If he won this game, they would force a playoffs, a rapid tie break, which would then decide who would move to the semi-finals. The entire hall was empty at that point, and then Magnus started pushing his queenside pawns. He had 1 extra pawn, but 2 on the queen side. He moved his rook to a8, and I really liked this move that he played. Look, black has doubled pawns, but Magnus, without prejudice, undoubles them, pushes his pawn to b4 to get the queenside majority and his bishops rolling. And with that, he got a huge advantage. Alireza resigned the game, and the scores were tied. Magnus had done it. He had forced the playoffs, and now the match was equal. Anything could happen from here, but it was very clear that the momentum was on Magnus's side. When the game ended, I was moving towards the playing hall, and I saw Magnus exit with his girlfriend Ella. And this was a very beautiful scene. You could see both of them being extremely happy on the victory, and Ella especially was so happy. It just felt that they both celebrated this victory together. The rapid game was about to begin in 10 minutes, and Magnus was back again in great spirits as he came to the game. 15 minutes plus 10 seconds increment, 2 games, and if it was 1-1 tie, it would move to the blitz portion. By now, it was clear that Magnus was having great chances, and with his great spirits, it also felt that he was the favorite in this match. For Alireza Firouzja, it was also a chance to show his mettle. He came to the board with his father being there, always by his side. And Alireza doesn't talk much before the game, but you could see that he also was really keen to beat Magnus. Magnus arrives, both of them shake hands, and this one, the new position was already set up on the board. This was position number 885, and you could see that after a point both the players really got into the zone. They started analyzing the possibilities, the 2 knights on the side, the rook there, the king on its initial square like in a normal game, but the queen is on b1 and b8, the rook is on the other side. I mean, this is very complicated. Should Alireza play e4? Well, Magnus played a very risky opening to Alireza's c4. Alireza opened the game. By the way, look at the pieces here. The rook, queen, rook, knights, bishops. And so Alireza here opened the game with 1 c4. And you will see that the queen immediately attacks the pawn on h7. Magnus brought his knight out defending it. And here Magnus made a move which was not great. He played to attack the h2 pawn, and Alireza called the bluff. He said to Magnus, take the pawn. And if Magnus took another pawn which was on g2, he would be in trouble, because after knight coming out to g3, it is already clear that white is the one in driver's seat. And so Magnus went back with his queen, but by now Alireza had built up a strong center. Magnus broke with b6, and then he pushed the pawn e5, and where did Magnus's knight go? Well, by the way, the rook attacked the queen in between, which was a nice move, and now knight g4 was played, and here it was important to just develop your knight g6, but instead Magnus made an error. He took on d4, and this allowed Alireza to take the pawn and attack the knight. Now the knight had to move, but where? And so either h5 or f5, but already it was getting very tricky, and now came the move bishop f4, skewering the queen and the rook. If you pushed the pawn, which was natural, then c5 was extremely strong, which is why Magnus took a pragmatic decision to give up an exchange. But by now, it was clear to one and all that Alireza was in the driver's seat, and he was pushing over here against Magnus Carlsen. You could see Magnus being extremely tensed on the board, but he is a big fighter, and he used his e-pawn to create so much play in the position. In fact, his 2 bishops started to overpower the rook, and here is where Magnus played an amazing move. And I think by now it was clear that if anyone was playing for a win, it was Magnus Carlsen. So here you can see that black has 1 pawn and a bishop for a rook, but his e-pawn is running down the board. And when Alireza attacked the bishop, Magnus chopped the pawn. Very nice decision, because if knight takes, you push e2, and now e1, queen. And we reach this endgame where Magnus is a pawn up suddenly. Of course, this is a draw. There's no doubt about it. However, Alireza blundered in this position, and you could see Magnus instantly feeling that he has got the knight. Knight moved to c6, and then the king came in. The knight was trapped in the center of the board. Actually, it was moved to the side, and Magnus Carlsen managed to once again show his amazing endgame prowess. It's just amazing how he is able to grind every single time when he has the advantage. There's something about this guy that endgames are just so good with him. In this position, when Alireza played his knight to h3, I realized that this game should be drawn, because if you take the knight, king takes, and this king just settles down on the h1 square, and it's a positional theoretical draw. But Magnus kept trying, and Alireza kept moving his knight back to h3, and I thought there's no way to make progress here for black. However, Magnus rerouted the bishop, and when Alireza played his knight here, I realized, oh my god, even the king and pawn endgame is drawn. Magnus cannot win with an extra pawn, so this should be a draw. But once again, Magnus tried, and here is where Alireza had to bring his knight either to e1 or b2, keep it close to his camp. But he ventured out, and Magnus instantly attacked it with his bishop. Now the knight had to move away from the king, and the king and bishop were strong enough to actually capture the knight. You can see how the knight can no longer go back, and in fact, Magnus now used this beautiful trick of putting his bishop 2 squares away from the knight to control it totally, and now the knight was trapped. With this, some beautiful fine maneuvering, Magnus managed to trap Alireza's knight. Now the king is going back, and eventually the knight was going back. Magnus took the lead in the match. You could see him there being slightly relieved, and what was a very nice scene was Magnus meeting Ella after the game and then feeling relaxed now because he has a 1-point lead. He asked the arbiter if it will start in 5 minutes. The arbiter said 10 minutes to the next game and then 5 minutes after the position is revealed. So Magnus took this time to take a bit of rest, and he also explained the end game to his girlfriend. He told her how he was winning, and it was very nice to see. In between the first and second rapid game was this very nice scene where Alireza's father, Hamid Reza, he put the bottles back on their tables because the sides were going to be changed. Now Alireza would play with the black pieces, Magnus would play with the white pieces, and that was very thoughtful of him. Magnus somehow was feeling a little bit fidgety before this round. You could see he wanted to go outside and get some fresh air because inside the tournament hall he was feeling a bit stuffy. So whenever he got a chance, he would go outside, get some fresh air. It was cold outside, but of course for a Norwegian this was normal. Magnus came back into the hall, and with this, now the draw of lots would take place for which position out of the 960 positions had to be played. This time we had the German youth team who came in along with the two famous German brothers, Swane brothers, Friedrich and Rasmus Swane. This beautiful machine which has been created to choose the position number, all the balls enter into the bowl, and then one of the balls is selected. You can see there Friedrich doing the honors, and finally position number 925 came out. The arbiter Johann Gregor was seen to put the position there. You can see the king came to b1, rook on c1, the bishop moved there, the queen came next to it, the knight came to f1, and the bishop on g1. Whoa, not an easy position to figure out what to do. But the good news for Magnus fans was that he had now the white pieces, and generally, like in a normal game of chess, white has a small advantage. You could see Alireza taking a glimpse of the position and then thinking about in his head. This is a superpower that chess players have. They don't need the chessboard even though it is chess 960. Magnus came to the board, put his jacket on the chair, and then sat down. Alireza, meanwhile, thought in his head on the side. Magnus prefers to think about the position by looking at the pieces. He shook hands with Alireza there, and then both of them, of course, needed to get their bearings together on the position. They had 5 minutes to figure it all out. And then Alireza also took his chair. You can see Magnus being very, very serious about what his first move would be, because you could play c4, you could play e4, you could play d4, b4 may also be possible, and g4 or h4 may also be possible. The possibilities are limitless. They shook hands, and Magnus now opened the game with e4, and Alireza instantly responded with h6. Now this was perhaps not the best move, h6, because when you give the center to your opponent, it is dangerous, but Alireza was banking on the fact that his bishop would create the magic on that long diagonal. It was not to be. Magnus Carlsen simply built up a beautiful central position, and this is another example of how, if you don't control the center, you can land up in a very difficult position in this freestyle chess. A key moment of the game arose over here. Alireza was lost, but Magnus was put under pressure. You can see Alireza's father also moving around. He was also under some stress for sure. But what happened with the game was that Magnus, with 50 seconds on the clock, came down to 10 seconds. He couldn't figure out a move, and he was so stressed out. Look at the time, 4-3. He finally made a move, pressed the clock, shook his head, sort of taking away all the stress and saying, come on, refocus on the game, because all of a sudden he had made a mistake. Alireza took the pawn, but that was also a mistake. Here, after queen b3, Alireza should have taken the knight. The point being that if you take with the pawn, black can take the queen and finally chop the knight in the center, and he is a piece up. The right thing to do here for white is to take the queen, then take the rook, and now after knight is captured, you take back with the f-pawn. Yes, the knight on h3 and h8 are bad, but black is a piece up, and there are good chances for anything to happen here. But once Alireza took the pawn on a5, it was no longer winning for him, or it was no longer equal. He was completely lost, and you could see how Magnus brought his rook in, put his pawn on f5, and completely dominated the game. Over here, Magnus brought his rook to c5, attacking the pawn on b5 and the pawn on d5, and Alireza had nothing left but to resign the game. He stopped the clock, and Magnus, look at that, he was so relieved to win. A sip of water, a smile on his face, knowing that it was not an easy day at work, and a kiss to his girlfriend. Magnus Carlsen had done it. The inspiration off the board and on the board had all worked for him. Ella put his jacket in place, and Magnus now moves to the semi-finals to take on Nodirbek Abdusattorov. An important victory for Magnus. Alireza moved out of the tournament hall. Of course, not feeling great. It was a tough day at the office also for him. Magnus, of course, was surrounded by journalists after his victory, asking for an interview. He went to the commentary room for nearly 20 minutes. Ella stood there for him, and then when he came out, another interview was asked for. Magnus said, I can do only one question. He was, of course, very, very tired, but he knows that it is his job to also give interviews which would help to popularize the game. This is something that Magnus has always taken care of, and here you could see him telling the reporters that I need some time in the fresh air. He felt that it was quite stuffy inside, so he wanted some fresh air. But finally all the entire setup of lighting and all was done inside the hall, and so he came in, removed his jacket, and did the interview there. The interview was done by the very well-known journalist Peter Doggers, who works for Chess.com and who is here to do the interviews. And it was a very quick arrangement made by the media team. Let's listen to the interview that was done here by Magnus, where a couple of questions were asked.
Magnus, a long day. You have many titles, but you're also like the king of comebacks, aren't you?
Yeah, I have to say I was not too optimistic coming into today. The way that I've been playing the last couple of days, I mean, there was nothing suggesting that I was going to come back. So, of course, thrilled to have made it through a very tough day.
A lot of this tournament was your idea. Yeah, you were involved in the players and in the whole format. Now, after a couple of days, how do you view it? How it's been going so far?
It's absolutely exhausting, but I think that's the way it's supposed to be. Chess to me is mainly a sport, and it's not supposed to be easy on the players. But it's it's really hard. It's really hard work.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Magnus's day today shows that if you are in good mood and in good spirits, it leads to great chess. And of course, it also showed the beautiful relationship and bond that he shares with his girlfriend and how she is invested in his career. It will be fascinating to follow this tournament and Magnus's journey ahead, but for now, he needed to take some rest.